Welcome to PG Pulse, Press Ganey's podcast on all things healthcare, tech, and human experience. In this podcast, we'll be joined by some of the best and brightest minds in the industry to discuss challenges, share insights, and innovate the future of healthcare. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to PG Pulse, where healthcare leaders explore what it truly takes to deliver safe, high-quality, human-centered healthcare. I'm Tejal Gandhi, Chief Safety and Transformation Officer at Press Ganey, and today I'm joined by Dr. Steve Markovich, President and CEO of OhioHealth. Steve brings a rare combination of experiences: physician, hospital operator, system executive, and former Major General in the Ohio Air National Guard. That blend of clinical credibility, operational rigor, and military discipline makes this conversation especially meaningful as we talk about zero harm 24/7. So, Steve, I'm really excited to come here and talk to you today, and especially given the diversity of your background, and would love to just start with this idea of zero harm. And OhioHealth is publicly committed to zero preventable harm and invested deeply in high reliability. As a physician CEO, someone who's flown combat missions where reliability is literally life or death, as it is in healthcare, how do you define zero harm 24/7?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a topic I enjoy talking about, and we're very committed to it throughout the organization. You know, our journey to being a high reliability organization is one we picked up a couple of years ago. It is a journey. We are not there yet, but we are very consistent and frankly a little bit adamant about this idea that zero preventable harm is, while it may not be achievable, it needs to be the goal. So we're very excited about that, but it has to be woven into your culture. You mentioned my military experience, where safety is, you're dealing with very complicated processes with some very expensive equipment in unique environments. Which is very much like healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so, the idea that you need to think safety first, you need to think about, certainly think about the mission, what you're trying to accomplish in terms of whether it's patient care or a military mission. But that idea that you have to have trust, you have to have a culture of accountability, you have to have processes that are defined, and everyone has to be focused on the same goal. And when you do that, we think that's the best way to really approach the work.
So one of the barriers that I've seen sometimes in the industry is that the board and CEO delegate quality and safety, maybe to the chief quality officer or somebody else, but their focus is on other things and they've sort of delegated.
Sure.
Tell me about your approach. And, I personally think that's a mistake to have that delegation happen, but I'm curious as to how you approach it and what you think about that.
Well, you can delegate some things, but the accountability still remains at the top. And I am OhioHealth's first physician CEO. And I think being a physician in the number one chair does bring it brings a different perspective to the work. It brings an entirely different conversation. When we talk about quality, we talk about safety at the board, at the quality of care committee, with physicians in our tiered huddles. I participate in all of those things, and you do bring a different perspective. You speak the language. You can sniff out where there may be opportunities to go a little bit deeper. I'll keep it in a PG-friendly way to say that. But I think you have to be engaged at the top. I mean, if the senior leaders don't all actively walk the talk, be engaged, understand what's going on. It's important. You won't be successful. So certainly things are going to be delegated. You're going to need content expertise. You're going to need folks to do RCAs. You're going to need folks to, you're going to have, we have a tiered huddle process, as many organizations do. By the time the level 5 meeting is happening at noon, I'm in that room with other senior executives. And so certainly things are happening. It gets filtered up by the time things get to me a bit, and that's appropriate. But there are optics. The other thing that the office of the CEO can provide is clarity around the commitment and prioritization of resources. It is amazing that when the CEO says we're going to do this, all of a sudden we can find the money, we can find the capital, we can find the FTEs, and it doesn't get it doesn't get vetoed at a lower level. So I do think it's important. You have to do it the right way. You have to trust your teams, and you have to, build. You don't do anything by yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you stand on the shoulders of many other people, but that's been my approach. I think we're being successful at it. But I do think, I would say in the peer groups that I sit in, probably 30 to 40% of CEOs today are now physicians. That's not a statistical number. I don't know. But I can look at the peer groups I'm in, and I'll count the number of docs that are sitting in the CEO chair. I think it's important. And I think it does help. I'm sure there are organizations that have a CEO at the top that may struggle, but I think it helps push the agenda. And for all the other reasons I said, clarity of purpose, alignment of resources, prioritization of projects, it's important and it helps.
So let's talk about that resource piece for a bit, because, I know I have struggled in safety over the years, sometimes with the ROI question. I was frustrated. I had to have an ROI for some of the things I wanted to implement because I knew it would reduce harm. And, you're constantly having this tension of where to invest your dollars. So how do you think about that? And how do you bring safety into conversations around investments in other areas, for example?
There's a couple different ways I can go at that. Certainly as a faith-based not-for-profit, which OhioHealth is, it has to be early in every conversation. When we have, as many organizations do, we have an annual capital process where we look at projects. We look at projects with a balanced scorecard approach. Certainly we look to see if there's an ROI, but we look, what does this do for quality? What does this do for associate or physician engagement? What does this do for health equity? And so we will grade projects on multiple facets. It's not just the projects with the highest ROI rise to the top. We take into fact quality, safety, associate and physician engagement, health equity, all those things, and you try to develop a portfolio that addresses everything. I mean, some projects may be heavily focused on ROI, some projects maybe have no ROI, but they're just the right thing to do. I can be a little bit more quantitative about it though, because I sit in meetings with my lawyers where unfortunately, like most organizations, we have periodic bad outcomes, and occasionally those outcomes get litigated. And I see the result on the other end when you've got a case where there may have been opportunity for improvement, and you can see the economic damages that may get paid. So you can attach an economic benefit to the investment. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's the beauty of having senior leaders who understand this journey and are trying to make big inroads into the quality safety agenda. When you put people like me and others in the seat, this is what you're going to get. It's 40% of leadership is leading with your gut.
Yeah,
and you've got to know just kind of where you want to go from a doing the right thing perspective.
As we think about high reliability and the journey that you are on, how has your experience in aviation really shaped your thinking about high reliability, but also maybe your thinking around variation? Because one of the areas that I've also talked about as a barrier to accelerating our progress is that we tolerate a lot of variation in healthcare that's unnecessary. There's certainly sometimes it's necessary, but we tolerate a lot of unnecessary variation. So how has your maybe your aviation background in particular helped you think about that?
Well, I spent 38 years in the Air Force in total, between the Air Force and the Guard, of which I flew most recently F-16s. So I spent a good part of my career as an F-16 instructor pilot. So this idea of variation is a topic that is very much embraced in that environment. You can take a pilot from the Air National Guard in Ohio, fly them over to Korea, drop them into an Air Force base in Korea, and in 24 hours they're fully embedded in that unit in Korea, flying with those pilots that they didn't know until they got there. How do you do that? You have to have standardization. You have to have goals. Yeah, and it's not just checklists. Because checklist discipline is very important, and that's what gets the airplane started and gets us, into the air. But it takes tremendous discipline. It takes a tremendous amount of training and knowledge about how we're going to do the mission that we're going to go do. You send 4 pilots up, 4 F-16 pilots up to go, let's say, dogfight or go to a bombing range. Well, it's almost an orchestration of how that happens. And you might say, well, but Steve, because I have these conversations with my surgeons, because I try to bring standardization to some of the things we do. The surgeons will say, well, Steve, every patient's different. And I say, well, every combat engagement is different. But, there are rules, and what the rules create is a series of expectations that in a certain situation, I know how you're going to behave, and you know how I'm going to behave. It's a contract. Who's going to be at what altitude? Who's going to be on what side? Who's going to, depending on what I say in any given moment, you're going to respond in a certain way. And one of the things that's really unique about the military is a lot of people think the military is a very hierarchical, rank-oriented organization, and that is true to a certain extent. But once you get into the airplane and the 4 of you are flying, the rank, for the most part, comes off, and it's about roles. So if we're going into a combat situation, two pilots, and I'm the first, even though I might be number 2, I might be the wingman, to quote Maverick and Goose, I might be the wingman, but if I see the bad guy first, now I'm in charge. 2's engaged. As soon as I say I'm engaged, the number 1 person, who's the leader, he actually has to declare that he is supporting, and his job is to support me. So there's all these little things. I give you 100 examples. But when you take, the largest combat deployment I went on, there were 72 airplanes in one engagement. And you can't do it in a safe, effective manner unless everyone knows the ROE, the rules of engagement, and the rules on how we're going to accomplish the mission. Everything from how we walk out of the hangar to the airplanes, and we taxi, we take off, and execute, and come back. That starts in the flying world with a briefing. Mm-hmm. So 2.5 hours before you take off, all the members come together and you literally talk through everything you're going to do, with all the contingencies, with all the what ifs. And I think that happens sometimes in healthcare. The thing that happens in that world, that doesn't happen in healthcare, is you may go fly an 1.5-hour mission, and you'll come back, and then you'll debrief the mission for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. You'll play everybody's video. At a certain point in the mission, you were supposed to be in a certain place in time and space. Were you there? There's accountability. There's expectations, and the government, the Air Force, has created the tools to help us with video and GPS and satellite imagery and things like that. You can replay the mission and look for opportunities to improve. So there's a lot of similarities, especially when you think between procedural healthcare, the OR, a cath lab, and aviation.
I think this idea of behavioral expectations, that like everybody knows what the expectation is, and then along with these practices like briefings and debriefings, et cetera. I mean, that is HRO, right? And we always talk about it's people plus process plus technology, and right. You need all 3. But that people part, in terms of the culture and the behavioral expectations, that part is really key. And I think we have lots of opportunities around that in healthcare, and along with that, the power distance piece that you talked about, that, when you're in the plane, that power distance has flattened, and, we definitely have opportunities there as well. I think about it from an internist point of view. I think procedural areas are definitely easier to maybe do the briefing and debriefing, but, are we debriefing about maybe a diagnostic error that occurred? And it's just not built into our culture yet, but I think we have opportunities around that.
There is such a different sense of discipline in that environment. I mean, you can think about the Thunderbirds, the Blue Angels. We've all seen the pictures of airplanes flying 18 inches apart, and certainly you think about that. But I'll give you another example, and it's a great example, I think, of discipline, where 4 airplanes are flying, and one person has a problem, and he uses the words "knock it off." If the words "knock it off" are uttered, Sabre 2-1, knock it off. 2, knock it off. 3, knock it off. 4, knock it off. So everybody acknowledges, and then nobody speaks. The only person that's allowed to speak is the person that said, knock it off. Because what they're saying is, I have a problem, I have a question, I need a moment. It's the kinds of things we would call maybe pulling the red handle in healthcare.
Yeah.
They've said, hang on, and everybody else, there isn't a debate about whether you should say that or not. It's like, it's just assumed that person has a problem of such gravity that they're going to stop everything they do and we're not going to do anything until we sort that out.
And they're not scared, to your point.
Right.
Sorry. And they're not scared, to your point, of doing that, of sort of being looked down upon.
Even if they're a lieutenant and the leader's a general.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. It's just the way it's baked into the culture.
So as you think about OhioHealth and you are trying to create one OhioHealth, you have a large health system across, hospitals, ambulatory, rural communities, et cetera. So how do you think about one OhioHealth and setting those expectations and reducing variation, et cetera, across such a large health system?
Well, we started our conversation talking about the tone at the top. You do have to lead. You have to lead by example. We have an expectation that all of our leaders go on Gemba. We do Gemba rounds. People call them different things. We call them Gemba rounds. And we actually track senior leader participation in Gemba rounds. And there's a report that comes to my desk, and we review it as a team every month. Who went on rounds? What did you see on rounds? What did you hear on rounds? We track where we round. We like to make sure that we're not all going to the big hospital, and we're not all going to the easy, the hospital that's closest. We got to make sure that everybody gets access. So you've got to have visibility. You've got to talk about your commitment to the goal. But as the CEO, I'm not going to write those rules for the OR. So you've got to have teams of people. Some of them are embedded quality leaders, and some of them are just good operational leaders. If you can get a couple of physician champions who are practicing leaders, they're influential on the medical staff and influential with the nurses and the other associates, and get them to buy into what you're trying to do. They can really exponentially move that ball. So, be visible, walk the talk, identify what the goals are, identify champions to help you, and just you've got to be relentless about it.
So talk to me a little more about the physician engagement, because I do hear that over and over again that, organizations have challenges engaging physicians.
Right.
I have always felt that safety is one of the easiest things to engage physicians around because, they absolutely don't want to cause harm.
Right.
But there are challenges as well. So how have you really tried to engage physicians here in this high reliability journey?
Well, I would agree with you. I think none of us went into to practice medicine to hurt anyone. What happens, I think, over time is that the cadence of life. You've got a busy office schedule and a full clinic, or you've got cases in the OR and a 7:30 start time, and of course at 7:20 you get a phone call from the ER. So we're constantly juggling, the expectations of our patients, the expectations of the staff, the expectations of our business manager. There's all these things that are, physicians feel this pressure. I think we as leaders on the institutional side, we need to look for ways to make sure that we're not adding to that pressure. We need to make it as easy as we can. But we have a service line model at OhioHealth. So we have dedicated quality leaders, and we have within each, whether it's heart and vascular, neuroscience, orthopedics, surgery, we have a quality infrastructure that allows us to do that. Quality is on the agenda of all of our meetings. We start off every meeting with a mission moment, where mission moments aren't always the good stories.
Yeah,
they're also the OFIs, opportunities for improvement. And that cascades itself through. So if you came to my staff meeting, you'd see how it starts. If you went to the medical executive committee meeting of any of our hospitals, it would start the same way. So, you make it part of the agenda, you make it a priority, you create the infrastructure. It's going to cost you a couple bucks. If you want to have quality leaders that are in practice and you want them to have dedicated time to both learn the art of the quality and how it's measured and how it's influenced. You may have to compensate them through medical directorships and things like that. But I think it's important, and that's how we do it. That's kind of our approach.
I totally agree. This idea of dedicated time that's paid for physicians to do this kind of quality work is so critical. It can't be your nights and weekends volunteer work. It has to be part of what you do. And then also, I think it's really important to give those physicians the skills to do it. A lot of times people are put in these roles without maybe the competencies. Right. And so, investing in that as well, I think is really important.
And it's not just the docs. So we have 35,000 associates, and we have new associates leave. We have turnover just like everyone else does. So every 2 weeks we have new associate orientation for about 300 people, and I teach the first module of new associate orientation for every new associate here. And what I talk about is the history and the value system of OhioHealth, and I talk about the individual values, and so I talk about commitment to excellence, commitment to integrity, stewardship, compassion, inclusion. But then I go to a place where I talk about, when I think about integrity and excellence, those are two of our values, two of our 5 values. And I say those 2 values come together, and they're really important because society has entrusted healthcare leaders, healthcare providers, to take care of their most precious resource, which is their loved ones. So patients come in the door, and moms hand their kids to us, and fathers and mother or individuals hand their fathers and mothers to us and say, please fix my loved one, and please don't hurt them. And I go through examples, and there are other industries where this is true, where society has said, air traffic controllers, pilots, nuclear power operators, where tremendous responsibility is placed in people that if they don't follow the rules, and if they don't follow the checklist, and if they wing it, or they don't ask questions, then things go wrong. And I show pictures in my orientation of things. We've all seen the picture of the Costa Concordia, the cruise ship upside down where it hit the rocks, or an airplane crash where somebody didn't do it right. And I'll ask the room, I'll say, how many of you are nurses? And people will raise their hands, and I'll say, what would you do if you were asked to give a new chemotherapeutic drug as a new associate? You're asked to push a drug that you're unfamiliar with, you're not sure about the dosing, and you need to go give it to a patient. What would you do? Are you willing to say, hey, I need someone, I want someone to step me through this the first time. I need somebody to help double check me. I need somebody to look at my math, if there's a calculation involved. And I tell the new associates, I said, if any of my associates gives you grief for that, if somebody says you're wasting time or don't worry about that, you tell them to come see me. Because we don't want to hurt anybody. And I tell this to every new class of associates, the number one job is don't hurt anybody. Because it's devastating to the family, it's devastating to the patient, it's devastating to your career, emotionally and perhaps professionally. So it starts on day one as an associate, saying this is how we're going to operate in this environment. So it doesn't matter to me if you're a housekeeper or a doc, neurosurgeon or a broom pusher. All of us can have that opportunity to make a mistake or to not do it in a way that gets the best outcome.
Well, I love that you're setting the tone for psychological safety right from day one. It's coming from the top, from you, the CEO. There was a really interesting study that I just saw that happened in the last year or so that Google actually did called Project Aristotle. I'm not sure if you saw it. They looked at 180 high-performing teams across industries and what factors led to the high performance. And the number one factor was psychological safety in terms of team success. And we know teamwork is so critical for all the outcomes we're trying to achieve. So I think you're really, doubling down on the importance of that psychological safety with all the work you're doing is essential, and you're seeing the value of it.
You summed it up nicely. Psychological safety is what it's all about. Trust. I think it dovetails very nicely by a commitment to being what I call a learning organization. Again, going back to those orientations that I do, when I talk about excellence with the new associates, I say, my definition is, I want to do a better job today than I did yesterday. I want to learn something today that I didn't know yesterday. I want to teach someone something today that I didn't get the chance to teach them yesterday. So if you're a learning organization, if you're a teaching organization, and I don't mean it in the academic medical sense, I mean it's a cultural thing where everyone is a learner. Well, in an environment where you sort of embrace learning, you're subconsciously acknowledging that you have knowledge deficits. I wouldn't need to learn if I knew it all. So if you subconsciously can get people to embrace the idea that it's okay to not know everything, but I'm on a journey to learn, to do better, to experiential learning, book learning, that you in order to give the best patient care, I think it's the best way to do it.
Well, in safety, we've talked a lot about the learning system and how organizations need to have really robust learning systems. So, when people take the time to report safety issues, that we actually are learning and improving as a result. And I'm curious how you think about communicating that out to your organization, because a lot of times people do think reporting safety events is like a black hole.
Right.
And it doesn't go anywhere, so why should I bother, et cetera. And so, to me, that communication back to show that the organization is learning is incredibly important. Are there strategies that you've used here?
I think some of it's cultural and some of it's, strategic or process oriented. Again, I'll go back to a couple of military examples that I talk about a lot here. When you're a pilot in the Air Force, if there's an accident, there's what they call an accident investigation board, and there's a safety investigation board. And it looks at root causes, it looks at mitigating factors, it looks, tries to tell you what happened. But at the completion of that, and this is a little different than healthcare, and healthcare sometimes maybe we have some extra challenges, but there's some very famous videos of some airplane crashes, and once the investigation is complete and the system has learned from that situation, every pilot in the Air Force is required to sit in a room and review that accident. And we talk about it. So, you'd have a training session where you would go through the accident and say, here's what happened. Whether it was a mechanical problem or a system failure or a pilot, a process or procedure failure. Healthcare, we get tied up with the lawyers and we get tied up with the risk, and we don't stay focused on how do we get better. So you have to talk about that. You have to work. And if we have a bad outcome, that's why I love things like M&M or even you can take that M&M concept to tumor boards and other. It's the idea that we put good people in a room and we talk about the cases and we talk about the learning and what can we do better or what's the opportunity for the next patient. And you could do it in a blinded way. You can do it in a way where you don't put the organization at risk. But I always ask that question. When we especially cases where residents are involved. You review a case, let's say it's an OB case, where there's perhaps a less than perfect outcome for a child. And you've got, OB attendings, but you've got residents that are there at midnight that are, there's communication going on. And I use this only as an example. You've got nurse communication to the resident communication to the attending. Attending's trying to assess, how serious things are. When do I need to come in? When do I need to intervene? And I always ask the question, okay, so for this particular case, these residents learn, what about next year's class?
Right.
How do I make sure that this unfortunate incident never happens again? And I use OB only as an example. It could be in medicine, surgery, it could be anywhere, the ER. So how do we do that? That lateralization, you have to talk about it. You have to create the systems and the processes. And we talk about it at our board. We review cases in detail with our board. And sometimes it's not comfortable. But again, if it's done with a culture of safety, emotional, psychological safety, and it's done in a way that it's all about the learning and it's not, you have to be punitive, I think it works, but I think all of us have a way to go.
So tell me about your board a little bit in terms of how to your point about needing psychological safety with the board as well, how have you educated your board around some of these concepts and to make sure that those conversations aren't jumping to, oh, we should fire, X, but instead, let's think about the systems and human factors and all of those kinds of things. What kind of work have you done with your board?
Lots of training, lots of conversation so that they understand, especially the quality of care. We have the way we're structured, like many healthcare systems, we have a quality of care committee of the board. So the concepts of a just culture, the concepts of just reporting, the fact that we unusual occurrence reports, thousands per month, and then what's the process that we take to sift through thousands of unusual occurrences all the way down to what is a serious safety event, and what do we do with that? So that your first step is to educate them on. They have to learn a little bit about how hospitals operate. My board, we have physicians on our board, and we have physicians on all of our committees, which helps. But we are very transparent. We have a relatively formal onboarding process and orientation when you join the board. We talk, you can't just hit them with things like serious safety event rates and expect them to understand unless they come from a quality or a manufacturing. People that come from manufacturing that understand mean time between failures and things like that, they get it. But if you've got a lay board or a board that's C-suite executives, you may have to do some orientation. And then there's the analytics, making sure they understand the analytics. But really, again, from my chief of quality and my chief clinical officer and the CEO and the chief operating officer, we talk often about this idea of we don't want a punitive culture. We want a just culture. And we want to make sure we just get better.
So historically, safety, workforce engagement, and patient experience have been siloed. Much of the work I've done over the last 5 years has been, how do we break down these silos and understand the connections across all of these dimensions? So, and really for me, saying that, safety leads the way, understanding how safety impacts engagement, how safety impacts experience. And so, from your CEO perspective, how do you think about integration of these various domains together to make sure you're not overwhelmed by a bunch of different projects, but really seeing the whole? Sure.
Some of that comes with experience. I think that's why, you look at senior leaders of organizations and they've all got a certain amount of gray hair because you need to have been around the block a little bit to really understand how. I'm fortunate that I get to teach some of our MHAs, hospital administrative fellows, and I talk about healthcare being a spider web. People think they think it's a string, that if I pull here, this moves. And I go, no, it's a spider web. If I pull here, everything moves. And all that interconnectedness, and it's what you're talking about with those individual strands of the spider web aren't silos. They are all interconnected. If we have an organization that doesn't embrace safety and quality, how can I expect my HR workforce turnover numbers to be low? Because nurses aren't going to want to stay. They're not going to want to be part. I mean, a third of our organization is nursing. And then you've got other, allied health professional fields, and then you've got the docs. No one joins an organization no one stays with an organization that they believe is committed to quality, safety, and giving great care. I mean, so you think about, okay, workforce. How do I have an engaged workforce? How do I have low turnover? How do I have a low vacancy rate? Fix the quality.
Absolutely.
Efficiency. My chief financial officer. We've had a privilege to have some great CFOs who have all embraced the idea that the flywheel of the financial flywheel of the organization. It doesn't start with contracting. It doesn't start with your supply chain cost management. It starts with quality and safety, because that is what allows you to make sure that your ORs are running tightly and you engage your physicians, and then you can work on, okay, how do we go out and get the best implant pricing or whatever. But if you have to figure out that if it all starts with quality and safety, that is we have a when I talk to our team about the strategy for OhioHealth, I have two different tools that I use. It's the same information in two tools. One is like a spreadsheet which is what I tend to use for executive types. And then I have this mountain where at the top of the mountain is this idea that we want to be a thriving, growing organization that gives the highest quality and be the safest organization in the country. But at the bottom of the mountain, the bedrock of the mountain is safety and quality. You can't do anything. You can't grow. You can't be innovative. You can't be creative. You can't. You just can't get there unless you deliver a great product. And I think that's not just true for healthcare. We've all experienced different sectors of the community, whether it's aviation or the auto industry or food. If the quality's not there, you can put all the marketing on it you want. In the end, the quality will catch up, and you'll end up losing market share or losing business.
So, of course, I fully agree with that, and it was so incredibly well said. I have felt sometimes in healthcare that's not necessarily the way organizations or leaders have thought about it. That, for example, when budgets are tight, it feels like quality and safety resources are kind of the first to go.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you would say to your healthcare colleagues, or what would be one leadership message you would say to your colleagues across healthcare, specifically around that about, if you don't have the quality and safety, nothing else matters. But, especially with these challenging financial times, et cetera, like how would you convince colleagues around the country to have that same philosophy that you do?
Well, that's a great question, because I think I would hope that it would be intuitive, but perhaps it's not. And the financial challenges of healthcare today are real. You can't pick up a newspaper without hearing about the cost of healthcare or drug and supply costs or premiums that businesses and the government pays. So it's a real challenge. That being said, I believe there's fairly good literature that shows that as you advance on the quality and safety journey, your cost of care will go down. It'll go down through elimination of waste. It'll go down through reduction in malpractice. It'll go down through reduction in untoward events that are costly. That require readmissions and whether it's surgical site infections or catheter-associated infections, things like that. So I think the economic case is there. Hopefully, people are embracing the need to get on this journey early enough that there probably is a bit of an investment that you have to make. And if there are people out there at this point in our development, if people think that's a leap of faith, I struggle with that, because the data is all there that says if you do this, you will reap the benefit. If you don't have a strong balance sheet and you don't have you're in the red from an operating margin perspective, I can appreciate it's challenging, but that's where you should look for help.
This might be the turnaround strategy.
This could be the turnaround strategy, and you need to partner with organizations that are a little farther down the road in your community. Whether it's other healthcare organizations, other leadership organizations, consulting organizations. Ganey would be a great example, where you can find people to help you. And I just think you need to not have the hubris to say you can do it yourself. You just got to be vulnerable. I would hope that in today's society that a CEO doesn't lose his job for not. If you've got a quality problem, you should be nervous if you're not doing anything about it. If you're doing something about it and you're being aggressive and you're being thoughtful, that every board should embrace that and pat that leader on the back and say, how do we help you?
So you've invested in this high reliability journey. You are an incredible CEO leader of that journey. How do you think about sustainability? 5 years, 15 years, what are the ways that you're thinking about making sure that this is not going to be a flavor of the month, but really something that is just embedded in how work happens at OhioHealth? Well,
half of it's cultural. When you interview people, I have a way that a certain series of questions that I ask people for key jobs. And process improvement is a big part of my interview style. Commitment to quality and safety is a big part of it. So I'm looking for people who I don't have to convince. So, surround yourself with people that embrace the journey to begin with. Make the tools that you're going to use, whether it's your tracking mechanisms, your spreadsheets, your analytics processes, embed those in the daily cadence, how you run the business. If it's really interesting. So as I grew up in my career at OhioHealth, at one point I was the president of our largest hospital. I haven't been in that administrative environment for 15 years, but there's tools we used 15 years ago that are still being used over there. So, once you embed and create the processes, the tools, the culture, do it in a way that it sort of becomes foundational, it becomes screwed into the bedrock of the organization. It's not that the organization can't evolve. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that you can't make it easy to change it. And that way, years down the road, when I retire, the next CEO, when they step in, they've got a robust and they got a robust quality program that is achieving what it was designed to do. And then they say, well, if it's working, I'm not going to mess with it. So that would be my recommendation.
I love that. I mean, we talk about it like in this concept of habit formation, and like you can't imagine a time when you weren't doing this.
Right.
And so you think about your, engagement of your board, or your, tiered huddles, or your leader rounding that you talked about. Right. All of the things that you've talked about, making it such a habit that people just can't imagine not doing those kinds of things.
I hired a new CFO. She just started. This is her second week. She started a week ago Monday, and I went at noon, because noon is when the Tier 5 huddle happens for us. And I went and grabbed her. I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm going to go to a meeting." I said, No. I said, "Whatever your noon meetings are, they start at 12:15, because at noon you're going to be over here." And it's like, but you got to do it day one.
Yep. Set the expectation.
So set the expectation, create the cadence, and once people get in the groove, it feels right. And sometimes you have to do things that might be cute. If you look at all of our badges, we all have, safety acronyms and things like that. Well, they're there for a reason. They're there to jog our memories and to help us when we need a little kick. But there's great things. These are not expensive things to do. I think everybody, when we talk about the quality safety journey, people think about the expense. Maybe you need some FTEs, and you probably do need some kind of an event reporting system. Excel spreadsheets. We're probably, if that's where you're at, you can probably advance that. But it's not. There's a lot of things you can do that are not expensive, that are just, setting expectations, understanding where you are, creating the vision for where you want to go, and then talking about it. Everywhere you go, talk about it.
That visibility and transparency and leadership messaging, and leadership from you and your C-suite, but really leaders at all levels talking about it makes an incredible difference. Right. Well, Steve, it was really a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I learned a lot from your approaches here at OhioHealth, and I think it really reinforces how zero harm 24/7 is not just a slogan, but it's really a core value for an organization that gets set at the top and cascades throughout the organization. And that high reliability is the journey that we all should be on to really embed zero harm 24/7 into the organization. So I so appreciate the work that's happening here at OhioHealth. And thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Totally agree. And it's an important journey that we're all on, but we're happy to support it. It was a pleasure to chat. Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thank you for joining us today, and special thanks to our guests for sharing their time and insights. Stay tuned for our next episode, which will be released soon. In the meantime, visit our website, where you'll find more information on the human experience and a lot more.